The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to 2016. What better way to start off the new year than with a large group of armed militia members, at least one of which is the son of tax-evading rancher from Nevada, Cliven Bundy. They have broken into and occupied a federal building in Oregon. The group includes, as I mentioned, at least one son of tax cheat Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy. He had that standoff with federal officials back in 2014, basically because he just didn't want to pay taxes and thought that he didn't have to. They've been there for 2 days now and are refusing to leave until they get what they want, although it's not totally clear what it is that they want. And that's a key element to what I'm going to talk about in just a second here. This supposedly started as a protest in support of two ranchers who were jailed, but this has really turned into an anti-government protest. Ammon Bundy told CNN by phone from inside the location, quote, "We will be here as long as it takes. We have no intentions of using force upon anyone, but if force is used against us, we would defend ourselves." Think about the absurdity of that, Lewis. Listen, we have no intention of using force unless it's used against us. I mean, yeah, we're occupying a federal building and refusing to leave, and at some point someone might come here and try to get us to leave, but that's not our fault, right? I mean, if they came here and did that, that would be them using force, and then we would use force to defend ourselves. It's lunacy. I mean, this is absurdity.
Yeah, it's not like they received permission to occupy the building. So they basically did use force to take over the building.
Right, they've
because
already
it was
used
the threat
force.
of force.
Yeah.
It was the threat of force. So there's really no difference.
It's absolutely inconceivable that anybody could buy into this harebrained logic. What exactly do they want, right? Let's get back to that. When asked what it would take for the protesters to leave, Ammon Bundy did not offer specifics. He said, quote, "The people need to be able to use their land and resources without fear as free men and women. We know it will take some time. I would tell any federal agent that the people are enforcing their rights and expressing their rights to restore their land and resources back to the people." What does that mean? I mean, I can't understand what it is that they want. What are they saying they will do?
I don't know. Is this the same situation? Is there just another rancher who is using land that he shouldn't be using? I really don't know too much about the specifics of this situation.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like anyone does.
It relates to two farmers, the Hammonds, that were supposedly the catalyst for these protests, but then at the protest, and again, I don't even think protest is the right word, at the occupation of a federal building, they didn't specifically call for the commuting of the two prison sentences of these farmers. And there's a pretty astute guy involved in this, Dave Ward. He's the Harney County Sheriff. And he's figured out what's going on here. Let's take a look at what he said, Lewis. These men came to Harney County claiming to be part of militia groups supporting local ranchers, when in reality, these men had alternative motives to attempt to overthrow the county and federal government in hopes to spark a movement across the United States. And then going on to say that they are trying to get this resolved as quickly as possible. So that's the reality here, Lewis, right? I mean, this is just an anti-government protest. It's yet another attempt to opt out of parts of the law that they don't like. And that's what this is. And I don't think there's any other way to call this anything. This is domestic terrorism, right? And I looked around for some names for domestic patriot type terrorists that we could use. So instead of calling them jihadists, we could call them jihadists. I like that one, okay? Instead of Boko Haram, maybe these groups are called Yokel Haram. Or instead of Al-Qaeda, we could say this is Yal-Qaeda. Are any of these resonating with you, Lewis?
Yokel Haram is pretty good, I
Yeah.
guess. You know, I think that this seems to be almost an identical situation to the original Cliven Bundy standoff in a way. And the funny thing is, they won. I mean, they won that standoff. I mean,
And that probably emboldened them in some way.
I think it did. I mean, look at this. Now they're taking over government buildings. So I'm not sure how this ends here, but it could end with another victory for these groups.
I really hope not. And please, corporate media, stop calling them protesters. I accidentally used the phrase just now and caught myself. These are armed militiamen who are using fear and threats of violence. I mean, they have forcibly taken over control of a federal building, and police are saying, stay away because this could be dangerous. These are not protests, right? To say, oh, this is like when someone shows up and says clean water for all with the picket sign. No, there's no similarity between that and this.
And there's no similarity between what might be an open carry protest or just a gun rights protest where you have countless people walking around with guns. I mean,
Right.
They're taking over, a public street. They're not taking over a government building and with a threat of force. So, no, I would not call them protesters.
Last week, we talked about this leak that is taking place in California, which has displaced thousands of families. It has been going on since October. It is leaking untold amounts of methane gas into the atmosphere, and it's been receiving very, very little corporate media coverage. And now this has officially become one of the worst environmental disasters in the U.S. in recent history. We now we have an EPA investigation that is beginning. We have seen over 2,000 families and possibly many, many more now have to be evacuated. 3,000 additional families, in addition to the ones I told you about last week, have to be relocated. The leak is eventually going to be fixed, but the estimates now are that it won't be fixed until late February. Well, that's a lot of methane going into the environment. How much exactly? The numbers are stunning. Every day, the methane gas leaking adds pollution to the environment equivalent to 4.7 million cars driving around. That is each day, Lewis. This has been going on for months. It is a staggering amount of emissions that have been released into the atmosphere. This is insane. And it's still not getting much corporate media coverage. I mean, 4.7 million cars worth of pollution per day, month after month. Yeah, it's mentioned a little bit by a couple media outlets. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, we're visual people. We are a visual species, right?
Okay, yeah.
And in this case, you can't even see the pollution, right? You can't see it happening.
Right, you
It's
can't
not-
see the gas, and the
Yeah.
source is 8,000 feet underground.
It's not like those oil spills where you see the oil and the animals covered in the oil and maybe
Right.
even people covered in it. So maybe that's part of the reason why it's not receiving the coverage that it should.
Maybe so. And as I mentioned last week and again today, methane's environmental impact is exponentially greater than carbon dioxide, for example, right? The impact on the climate and our environment, our atmosphere, is absolutely huge from methane. Supposedly, the health impacts of the leaking methane are only temporary. It can cause headaches, nausea, etc., but only on a temporary basis. However, traces of the cancer-causing gas benzene have also been released by this, and the EPA is monitoring that. So for those saying this is not going to have a lasting health impact, well, that may not be the case as a result of the methane, but we now have benzene being released as well. And think about the cost of the repairs, which is expected to reach $900 million. Now, here's where things really get complex. The Governor Brown of California, has a sister who sits on the board for Sempra Energy, which is the parent company of SoCal Gas. Some are suggesting, and those who are emailing me are adamantly suggesting, that the reason we haven't seen Governor Brown declare a state of emergency here is because of that connection, that declaring a state of emergency in California would really call even more attention to this that maybe he doesn't want because his sister is on the board of Sempra Energy. Let's put that aside for a second, Lewis. Once you call a state of emergency, state resources become mobilized, and that means, as usual, we are socializing the cleanup costs, right? We have capitalism for the profits, and then we socialize the cleanup costs. And that is exactly what would happen if the state of emergency is called, although that may actually be the correct move. We may need that to be called in order to mobilize the resources necessary to put an end to this nonsense.
I mean, taxpayers are picking up the tab for many of the natural disasters. I mean, maybe not in the entirety of the cleanup costs, but certainly taxpayers are paying for it. So I expect that to be happen. Yeah, maybe it should be a state of emergency. I don't really know. But Dave, for these companies, the safety features that they would need to put in place I mean, I'm sure this is all calculated. I think they've all determined that it's still not worth doing because of the rarity of these events and because the fines are not big enough.
Yeah, there are a couple of reports saying that in the 1970s there were some safety changes that should have been made, which were not made by this location. We're researching that and hope to have more information about that for you soon. There was a shooting over the holiday weekend in downtown Tel Aviv in Israel near the intersection of Dizengoff and Gordon Streets. 2 people were killed, 7 were wounded, and the shooter has been identified as 31-year-old Nashaat Melhem, an Arab Israeli. His own father was in touch with authorities and identified his son, asking police to find him before he kills more people. Israel has also asked the Palestinian Authority for help in finding the shooter because there is the thought that the shooter may have fled to the West Bank. And I saw this, Lewis, and I saw the video, and it looked familiar. And as I started to research, indeed, this happened right where I, over the summer, had breakfast 5 or 6 times during my visit to Israel. And it wasn't clear from the reports, and it's still not clear to me. There's a few businesses right on this block. There's Sidewalk Cafe, and then there's a sushi place, and then there's a bar called Simta, and then there's also like a fruit and vegetable stand. One report said that the explosion, that the shooting rather, was at Sidewalk Cafe, which is where I was hanging out, Lewis, at 5-6 days. I had breakfast there or lunch over the summer. Very scary to see this. I mean, this is downtown Tel Aviv. This is like a shooting in Times Square. This is like a shooting in downtown Boston.
Yes, and I remember something very similar happening, well, in a way, to me, when I was in Israel. This was quite a while ago. We visited this city. I don't remember the name of the city right now, but I distinctly remember that the day
made a real impression on you.
The day after, we visited a lot of cities and we were very sleep deprived.
Yeah.
The day after we left, there were shellings, and one of the places was the city I was referring to, and it was pretty shocking. Had I been there a day or two later, if things were just slightly different, I might have been in the line of fire.
Absolutely. And, even in spite of this, I would still travel to Israel at this point. It is still very, very safe to be there. And I have friends who, after the most recent attack in Paris, said, I am not going to France, period. I mean, the odds of you getting into a car accident and killed on the way to the airport far exceed the chances that you will be the victim of a terror attack. I would not suspend travel to these locations, certainly not France and certainly not Israel at this point, although there are other countries that are far more dangerous where I would not go.
Yeah, of course. There's a long list of countries we would not set foot in at all, and I don't think France or Israel even compare to those places.
I agree with you. Let's take a break. Send me your thoughts on this. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at @LewisMotamedy.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I was thrilled to tell you last week that 2015 was the best year for the David Pakman Show ever, and I'm asking for your help in making 2016 even better. And one of the things you can do is sign up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership. Today's new member of the day is Roy Lopez. Roy, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. Roy gets unfettered access to the daily bonus show hosted by producer Lewis, where I am merely the sidekick, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show, and upcoming, another David Pakman Show members-only town hall, where all of our members are invited to a video conference with Lewis and with me. People ask questions, we answer questions, etc., etc. Very, very exciting stuff. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Also, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, the shopping you do can support the work we do. If you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon, this will redirect you to Amazon. Bookmark that link. Use it whenever you shop. Lewis, a lot of people over the last week using our link to purchase essential oils. I've been hearing about essential oils from more and more people. I legitimately know someone who thinks that essential oils cure cancer. And, I can't verify. I have not done any testing myself to see if that's true, but it sounds like a suspect claim. What are these oils used for?
I don't know. I've seen them around. I like to call them non-essential oils because
You've lived your entire life without them.
I have, Dave. And billions of people do also.
No, but I do know actually of a lot of good, I'm sort of joking around, but there's a lot of good uses for essential oils. I mean, one thing you can do is just a tiny bit of oil, of these oils, if you put them like in your laundry, for example, or in cleaning products, you can eliminate those like artificial scents, which often have who knows what chemicals in them, etc. That actually seems like a pretty good use for essential oils.
That seems fine if you want something to be scented. You know,
Right.
I mean, I personally don't want any scent at all in my laundry. I
Right.
keep it just, neutral, Dave.
Right.
Completely
Lewis is
neutral.
more of a throw a little baking soda in there to remove the scent. That's his MO, no question about it. Also, our link being used to buy the Hobbit books. You know what I'm going to say, Lewis. I have never gotten into the Hobbit books or the Hobbit movies or Lord of the Rings. I like sci-fi. I like some fantasy stuff. I cannot get into Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Hobbits type stuff. I don't know why.
It's just a mental hurdle for you. It's a mental impasse that you need to get over because there's really you're not citing any good reason why you can't get into it. You're just saying, I just can't get into it.
I watch it and
But
my
you
eyes
refuse
glaze
to
over.
watch it.
No, I do. I try to watch it and my eyes glaze over and I just can't I can't get myself to care about the story.
I felt that way about many things, about music, about
Sure.
certain movies, about certain shows.
Even about people you've dated. I mean, it's great.
Eventually, I find that that I wasn't just really paying attention, and that if I pay closer attention, there may be some qualities that I find to be appealing.
I like that. Very open-minded statement today from producer Lewis. DavidPakman.com/Amazon. Remember, use that link before you shop on Amazon to support our show. I've told you that Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's anti-Muslim and sort of nativist rhetoric is not going to help anything, and it will probably create even more enemies and make it easier for terrorist groups to recruit. We have now learned that Donald Trump is indeed featured in a new recruitment video from the terrorist group Al-Shabab, according to numerous experts. Evan Coleman, who's an analyst with NBC News and chief R&D officer for the private intelligence firm Flashpoint, was one of the first to identify Trump in this new video. He tweeted out, quote, "A new video from Al-Shabab in Somalia shows Donald Trump calling for a ban on Muslims and warns basic human rights do not apply in the United States." And we've talked about Al-Shabab before. It's an Al-Qaeda-linked militant group based in Somalia. They're best known, I guess, to the extent that terrorists are known for stuff, for a big attack on a Kenyan mall in 2003. And Coleman says that Trump appearing in this video signifies that he has a larger utility for the broader jihadist movement. Trump appears about 10 minutes into the video. And when we go back to the last Democratic debate, Hillary Clinton said Donald Trump is in ISIS recruitment videos. That was fact-checked, and at the time it was determined to be untrue. Now, though, Donald Trump showing up in an Al-Shabab recruiting video, and I think the bigger point, Lewis, is the type of anti-Muslim rhetoric we hear from Trump is useful to Islamic jihadists for recruiting, aside from whether it's ISIS or Al-Shabaab or whoever.
I think so. Still, in the broader scheme of things, it's not even close. It's not even close, Dave, to the most hateful anti-Islamic speech that is out there, right?
No.
There's far, far worse. So I'm not sure.
But is it coming from as prominent of a person is the question.
I suppose that's it. Here we have, the Republican frontrunner for president. And so, I mean, I guess that makes it a bit more useful as a recruitment tool.
And again, I'm no defender of Hillary Clinton. She said Trump was in ISIS videos, and he wasn't to the extent that it was fact-checked. But she's right about the underlying point. Trump's anti-Muslim rhetoric has and will continue to be used by jihadists as a recruitment tool. And I guess Trump can blame Hillary, right? He can say, hey, look, Hillary Clinton gave Al-Shabaab the idea of using me in their videos when she mentioned that at the debate. She's helping the terrorists recruit. That's the line I would expect from Trump.
Probably. And I also might expect Trump to be flattered that he's being used in these videos. For him, it's probably just more publicity, and any publicity is good publicity.
Imagine how quickly he went from just hiring undocumented immigrants in the United States to build buildings and having Mexicans make his suits in Mexico to now criticizing undocumented immigrants and being featured in Islamic jihadist recruiting videos. He's really come a long way in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I don't know where else he needs to be popping up. Maybe in porn or something like that. It's just that's all there is that's left.
It doesn't seem like it was that long ago that Ben Carson was tied for the lead of the 2016 Republican primary race. On November 5th, I went back and looked at the numbers over the weekend. On November 5th, Ben Carson and Trump were in a statistical tie. They each had about 25% support from Republican primary voters. 17 days later, okay, by November 22nd, Ben Carson had dropped to under 20% support. By December 8th, a couple of weeks later, he had dropped to under 14% support. By December 21st, just under 2 more weeks later, Carson was down to 10%. And currently, and this is just amazing, in an average of recent polls, Ben Carson has about 8.8% support. And now his campaign manager, Barry Bennett, and his communications director, Doug Watt, have called it quits. Let's take a look at a statement on screen here. Barry Bennett and I have resigned from the Carson campaign, effective immediately. We respect the candidate, and we have enjoyed helping him go from far back in the field to top-tier status, and apparently all the way back down to far back in the field. They don't mention that, though. Having just announced raising $23 million for the fourth quarter, more than any other Republican candidate, and passing 1 million contributions and over 600 million unique donors. What's 600? It can't be 600 million unique donors. What do they even mean? 600 unique donors since March? Is that 600,000? I don't know. Anyway, we are proud of our efforts for Dr. Carson, and we wish him and his campaign the best of luck. Yeah, I mean, this statement doesn't really coincide with reality in that Carson's campaign has been a total abortion. The primary problem being he doesn't really know anything, combined with the reality that the ideas he does present are either impossible or outrageous, and combine that with his bizarre, hypnotic, deadpan delivery, you don't really have a guy that can win there, do you?
Well, how do you define success? I mean, Dave, if I were to compare to many other candidates, I mean, he did do pretty well. And at one point, he was number 2. And so...
there was a very short period where he was statistically tied for the lead.
Yeah, that's true. And so I think they did achieve something, and their efforts were not, or maybe they were in vain, but considering who we're talking about here, a guy who knows nothing, they really did accomplish quite a bit.
You're really putting a positive spin on it. I like that. The real question now is, how long will Ben Carson stay in? It's not even looking like he could win any states. He might be up in Louisiana, but we don't even know because the most recent poll from there is from late September. No leads in the first 4 primary states. I think the U.S. has dodged a huge bullet here because this guy is cuckoo. I mean, this is a dangerous guy.
I guess he's pretty cuckoo. Well, we're still dealing with Trump and possibly
hey, one at a time, you know.
Cruz. So 2 more really big bullets that somehow we have to dodge. And I don't know, maybe we can pull like a Neo from the Matrix and somehow dodge these big ones.
Yeah, something's going to need to happen because there are some very, very dangerous people running on the Republican side. After the break, we will talk to an expert in populism, fascism, and totalitarianism about the difference between left-wing and right-wing left-wing and right-wing populism, something that some are confused about. That's next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by fellow Argentinian Federico Finchelstein, who's a professor of history at the New School for Social Research in New York City, and the author of 5 books about, among other topics, fascism, populism. His newest book is called The Ideological Origins of the Dirty War. It's so great to have you on, and I'm thrilled to talk about this idea of populism. We hear about populism when we hear about the ideas of presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. We sometimes hear about populism when we talk about, for example, the late Hugo Chavez from Venezuela, or the now former president of Argentina, Cristina Kirchner. And you have analyzed and studied populism extensively. And not all populism is created equal, is it? Populism can be both progressive or conservative, left-wing and right-wing in many ways. Let's start there.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Well, populism has a lot of connections and also disconnections or important distinctions with fascism. But like fascism, populism is neither left or right, but rather a combination of both tendencies. I mean, the point is that in populism, what you have is an idea of a leader which always appears as a messianic one, as one with all the answers, as one that will basically provide a break with history. And that leader, one way or the other, states that he or she represents the people. That is to say that there is a straight, direct link between the people and the leader. So, I mean, whether that is a left or right argument, it's a matter of the contents of that particular style of politics. But the idea that there are no mediations between what the leader knows and what the leader wants, and what the people know and what the people want, I mean, it's a very strong one. And it basically characterizes both fascism and populism, populism on the right and populism on the left.
So I would love to have you talk about some of the differences that we have seen, maybe looking at some specific examples between a left-wing populist leader and a right-wing populist leader. You know, I get many emails from people who describe themselves, consider themselves progressive, who say, I love the ideas of someone like Bernie Sanders, and to me they seem similar to the ideas of someone like the former Venezuelan leader Chavez. Is that a fair analogy or comparison because they are both so-called populists?
No, I don't agree with that analogy at all. I think there are important, significant distinctions between Sanders and Chavez. Chavez was a populist leader. Sanders is not. I mean, there is a tendency in this country to equate a progressive position with a populist one, and there are important distinctions. The most important one, perhaps, is that populism implies an authoritarian understanding of politics, because this idea that there is a person, a leader, who is not just a guy, but the one who knows better than the rest what everybody wants. I mean, it's simply put authoritarian, and whether that idea serves anti-equalitarian politics or equalitarian ones, that idea is defined by its authoritarianism. Now, that is extremely different from the position of Sanders. So I actually do not think that there is an analogy, but rather the opposite, that these two politicians are antithetical.
And can you talk a little bit more about that? In other words, Bernie Sanders, he has this label in the United States as the populist candidate in the sense that he is for the people as opposed to for the elites. And that's a common characteristic of populists, right? That they are anti-elites, however you define the elites in a particular context. Can you talk a little bit more about what specifically about Bernie Sanders' ideas do not strike you as populist?
Well, I'm not an expert in either Mr. Sanders or American politics as such, but I will say that I mean, when you let's say when you listen to Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton or even other Democratic candidates, you don't find these statements or these ideas, which eventually, when they are in government, turn into policies. These ideas that the leader is the only one that knows, that the leader basically anticipate what the people want, or even that the leader knows better than the people. So you have the opposite. You have an idea of dialogue. You have an idea of reaching out, and also you have an idea of the people. And this is very important. I mean, this is perhaps a major distinction. You have an idea of the people which is very diverse. On the other hand, in opposition to this very diverse idea of the people, In populism, what you have is what a French political thinker Claude Lefort called a unitary notion of the people, a Unitarian notion of the people. That is to say that the people are very homogeneous, that the people always resemble the looks and the thinking of the leader. So that's very different. And in populism, what you have is this. In populism of the right, now going back to your question of what is the difference between populism on the left and populism on the right. Let's say the difference between Mr. Trump and Mr. Chavez, or let's say Marine Le Pen and I would say Christina Kirchner. I mean, Trump and Le Pen representing the populist right, and Kirchner and Chavez representing the populist left. I mean, there are important differences between all these understandings of the political. One is that both share, because they are populists, both share an idea of the enemy that is central to the political. That is to say, that you cannot do politics without having an actual enemy. But there are important distinctions. In populism on the left, what you have is the enemy generally represented as a citizen of the nation who is a traitor to the nation. Whereas in populism of the right, generally the enemies are internal and external minorities. For example, immigrants, or let's say religions which are different to whatever they believe the people are. So if Mr. Trump believes that Americans are, especially or particularly white and Christian, then the enemy for him becomes Muslim and Hispanic. And this is not really an example. This is basically what defines his idea of the political enemy in the US.
Can you talk a little bit about something you said at the beginning, which is when we talk about populism, it's also important to understand how so-called populist ideas can sometimes lend themselves in the direction of either fascism or totalitarianism. I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Well, historically, I would say historically is the other way around. I mean, basically what you have is fascism, which after 1945 couldn't be. I mean, it couldn't be a legitimate political choice in Europe or Latin America or the US. And you have people coming from that tradition, that very authoritarian tradition, creating first a populism of the right, a populism, let's say, a form of democratic politics, which was still anchored in fascism. Now, fascism is not democratic at all. Fascism is basically stands and advocates for dictatorship. After 45, the fascists or people close to fascism couldn't do this dictatorial and totalitarian politics in the new democracies that emerged, so they created an in-between, something that was and looked democratic, but also was rooted in authoritarian traditions. So if Mussolini or Hitler advocated for dictatorship, what people like Chavez or Trump will be advocating for will be authoritarian democracies. And there is a major distinction between fascism and populism on one hand, but on the other hand, they are quite connected. They both share an idea of politics with, let's say, messianic leaders, with establishing no mediations between, at least metaphorically, between the leader and the people. That is to say that there is a strong anti-institutional tradition in both fascism and populism.
So is it fair to say, at least, that in some cases we've seen right-wing populism actually be the sort of public face of what were unpalatable or no longer practical fascist ideas? Is that fair to say?
Well, it's an important repackaging, but a repackaging that in a way changes also the substance of the thing. Because what you have is a form of authoritarian democracy, which eventually turns to be a very different thing to a form of dictatorship. That is to say that, the fascists use elections to destroy the democratic system. The populists use elections to win elections, and when they win, they call for new elections whenever it happens, because they resort to, let's say, that form of electoral legitimacy. So but then there are not, let's say, it's not that the boundaries are totally eliminated between fascism and populism. That
There's
is
a
to
sort
say,
of spectrum, right?
it's a spectrum. So what you are seeing in Venezuela now is perhaps the possibility, if they decide to go that way, that even they will no longer. I'm talking about the current populist leader in Venezuela, Maduro. They didn't have good electoral results. They are losing Congress. Now the question is whether they will remain in a populist fashion, that is to say, respecting the electoral system, or they will go in a more dictatorial way. Because populism is a form of democracy that doesn't rely too much on institutions, but still relies on elections. So when you don't have elections, when you don't have that sort of key element of democracy, not the only one, but a key element of democracy, then you no longer have populism, but perhaps you have fascism or totalitarianism.
Well, we will continue following the situation in Venezuela as we have. I want to thank our guest today, Federico Finchelstein, professor of history at the New School for Social Research in New York City. His newest book is called The Ideological Origins of the Dirty War. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
New Hampshire State Representative Josh Moore is a self-described pro-family conservative and naturally a Republican as well. He recently said that unless exposing breasts in public during breastfeeding is banned, he should be allowed to grab the nipples of breastfeeding mothers. He posted this comment to his Facebook page, then he deleted it after all hell broke loose, but thanks to the advent of taking screenshots and the print screen button on modern keyboards, we do have a record of his statement where he said, "Who doesn't support a mother's right to feed? Don't give me the liberal talking points, Amanda. If it's a woman's natural inclination to pull her nipple out in public, no problem, and you support that, you should have no problem with a man's inclination to stare at it and grab it. After all, it's all relative and natural, right?" Now, the Amanda he's referring to is New Hampshire State Rep Amanda Bolden, who was shocked and appalled, understandably, that New Hampshire Republicans were trying to effectively ban breastfeeding in public. In New Hampshire, currently, both men and women are allowed to go topless, and that's actually the case in a lot of places. In New York City, that's the case, many other places. And there's a Republican-sponsored bill which wants to change that so that women could be charged with a misdemeanor if they purposely expose the areola or nipple of their breasts in a public place. Since when do family values include grabbing the nipples of women breastfeeding in public? That doesn't sound like a family values, does it?
No, I just think it's really strange, the whole movement to try and suppress things that are perfectly normal, naturally occurring things that are supposed to happen. So I don't, of course, I think that this is a lame comparison, and, when I see someone breastfeeding, Dave, I don't have the inclination to go grab the nipple.
Right.
Maybe that is a problem for Josh Moore, but I don't know. What about you?
No, it doesn't happen to me either. And what this really is a part of that lunatic, authoritarian, strict father, supposedly Bible-based morality, right? No birth control. You either don't have sex or you have children and you take care of them. And when you're married, women had better be popping those children out. But when they do, and they have to feed those children, it had damn well better be in private because of, decency and areolas and stuff. And there's also the moronic equation of breastfeeding and indecent exposure, which is what underlies this. Oh, women are exposing themselves in public in an indecent way when they're feeding children, and we got to ban that. We've got to put that in the back room.
Yeah, what is indecent exposure? How do you define that? I mean, would he like to see charges against a woman who accidentally has her clothes ripped off by an escalator or something like that, I mean, would there be indecent exposure charges there?
Can we step back for a second and think about how insane this country is with the breast stuff? You can come up with any way possible to expose the base of the breast, right? It can stick out to the side of your shirt, on top, below. Anything's fair game. But God forbid you see nipple, Lewis. That ruins lives.
You know what's funny? And this is not someone I really look to for anything, but Miley Cyrus said the exact same thing.
Really?
She said that the country loves breasts and they're everywhere, but everyone's terrified of the nipple.
And then the other hypocrisy is also that if a woman who is relatively flat-chested exposes her chest, that is wrong in many cases. But a man with any size man boobs, or I guess the right term is gynecomastia if we're speaking medically here, which I try to do, that's fine. I mean, just the absurdity of it. I will never understand this obsession with breasts.
I mean, it goes back a long ways because at one point they were sexualized, right? In many countries they aren't. And they're just out there all the time. And so, a long time ago, Dave, everything was covered up, much like many women in the Middle East now.
And in many places, nothing is covered up also. Let's consider that.
Yeah, and there was a time when even showing your ankle was considered pretty, flirtatious and risque and maybe even obscene.
Yeah.
And now I guess we've kind of retreated all the way back to the nipple. The nipple is like the last stand.
Yeah.
If we can get by the nipple, we're in the clear.
Oh, yeah. Even though nipples may seem small, they represent something huge in terms of the obstruction that they are responsible for in society. I like that, Lewis. Very, very good analysis. Very disturbing story. An unarmed teen recently filed a federal lawsuit against police in Michigan for violating his Fourth Amendment rights after he suffered permanent physical and mental damage. The teen was cleared of charges against him, and we now have learned that none of the officers involved in the beating have received any disciplinary action. This goes back to an incident in August of 2014 where then 15-year-old Donovan Austin Braswell was hanging out with 4 other black teens when officers searching for an armed man ordered the kids to stay put. Braswell and 2 others fled on foot as Braswell was attempting to climb over a fence. Grand Rapids police officer Sean McCammon grabbed the teen, threw him to the ground before repeatedly striking him in the head with his flashlight. Now, the long and short of it, Lewis, is that the beating did permanent damage to Braswell. Ultimately, all charges against Braswell were dropped. He did not have a gun, which was initially said. He had not committed any crimes. However, the officers who beat him into permanent disability will have absolutely no repercussions. There will be no repercussions to them for their actions. And doesn't this encourage more of these acts by showing that you can do this and you won't get punished, at least in some cases?
I think in most cases. This is just one we heard about. These are incredibly frequent occurrences. And, it's always the same time after time. And we really do need, if we're going to have police and they're going to be armed and they're going to be able to, beat people like this without charges, we need to have elite police. They need to be elite, and they are anything but in this country.
Lewis, you've driven around many small towns in this country. Would you say that the average small town police force is made up of what you would consider, by your standards, an elite police force?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. And can you sculpt everyday your normal citizens to be elite police officers? I believe you can. You need to have more applicants, and you need to weed out the ones that can't make it. But this is it's absurd. It's completely getting out of control.
People commenting online saying, well, David, if he was innocent, why did he run?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. He had no gun.
You know why he ran? He ran because he hears stories like this all the time.
That's absolutely a factor. No question about it. Does he deserve permanent disability with police going unpunished because he ran? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. We have 2 voicemails today. Here is one related to Donald Trump. Take a listen.
Yeah, play this on the air. You guys suck. You don't know what you're talking about. You're liars. And everything you say about Donald Trump is a lie. And he will win.
Ooh.
and he will make America great again instead of leaving it like a piece of shit like you and your left-hand people are.
Yeah. Okay. Well, left hand. I'm left-handed, but I think you meant left wing. And here is a very different voicemail from another Trump supporter.
I'm left-handed too.
Hi, David. My name is Paul. I live in Colorado. I just saw that there was a Trump supporter calling your show and leaving a voicemail. And I know it might be shocking to you, but people do like Donald Trump, and I'm one of them. So have a great day. By the way, today is the first time I've seen your show, a little bit of it at least. And yeah, hope you keep on having a good time. Bye.
Lewis, that is the nicest Trump supporter maybe in the world, right? I mean, that guy's the nicest Trump supporter we've encountered on this show.
What a nice guy. Yeah, really. There you go. Those are the two types of Trump supporters, and there's far more of one type of those.
Yes, you be the judge as to which kind. A Minnesota man has been sentenced to 5 years for a BB gun. We will talk about that on the bonus show. We will also hear from televangelists about why they need private jets. Sign up for membership and get instant access to the bonus show at davidpakman.com/membership. It is the #1 funding source for this show. If you like the work we do, help 2016 be our biggest year ever. Sign up for membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.